How to be Irish is an exploration of what it means to be Irish in today's world. Today's guest is Caoimhe Gibney. Caoimhe is a yoga, meditation, breathwork coach, and she's done a lot of healing, and she's actually discovered something that Irish people have this deep sadness within them that she has not seen in other people. We're going to talk about the role of different somatic therapies. Oh, that's a little hard to say in my Irish accent. And how that can help us overcome intergenerational trauma. We're going to explore that idea in today's episode. It's a really insightful and interesting one, and I hope that you get as much out of it as I did. Gurvmila. Caoimhe is an Irish physiotherapist, advanced breathwork practitioner, and founder of ANAM Collective, a home for your soul. Through worldwide trainings and healing retreats, she invites people to reconnect to their bodies, unlock their innate ability to heal, and foster deep connections with others. Based in both Ireland and Australia, Caoimhe is a somatic specialist, Reiki master, and a yoga and Pilates instructor, devoted to exploring and sharing practices that nurture the mind, body, and soul. Caoimhe, you are so welcome to the How to Be Irish studio. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off by asking you about how you moved from physiotherapy into breathwork, yoga, Reiki, and somatic specialist. And if you could also explain, what is a somatic specialist? That's a new one for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. What a lovely intro, Una. And I'm so delighted. I love being Irish. So when you asked me to come on the podcast, I was like, absolutely, that is right up my street. I graduated as a physio way back now in 2019. And I absolutely love physio. I've always loved sports and exercise. And I think like a lot of physios, you go into college thinking that that's what you'll end up doing, like being the team physio or working in professional sports. And I did that for the first few years. My first job was in palliative care in a hospice. And then I was working with like the Meath team, and I was doing all the like big GA bits. That was part of my plan when I got into the course in the beginning. But I think the experience in palliative definitely opened the door for me. I think at the time, if you had asked me, was it going to open a door, I would have said no, that I'm just heavy with grief and really struggling. And especially my first job out of college, it was a struggle. I was balancing working in the hospice and then covering teams and matches and everything. And although I love both, I think the initial experience of maybe being exposed to real life very quickly opened this whole door for me. So I was struggling in work at that time, like struggling to manage the grief, to manage just the emotional intensity of the job. And although I loved it and I got a lot of reward from it, I think I maybe didn't have the resilience tools. I didn't know how to connect to my body. I ended up getting very, very burnt out in that first job. My body started to react to the stress more than anything else. So like insomnia, I was putting on weight, I was really inflamed, my eyes would blow up. It looked like I had a constant allergic reaction, or that I was always crying or something. I didn't feel like myself, I didn't look like myself. I was honestly very low, but again, felt like I couldn't say that to anyone because that would be a sign that in some ways I was failing at this job that I loved. So 3 weeks off work when I was really unwell and had to like recover. And I remember sitting there and saying to myself, I actually can't live like this. Like there's something wrong either with the system or with me, and I need to figure that out. So I spent the next year just trying things, honestly, you know, like that's how it opened up. So I was trained in Pilates, but I had a lot of fear around teaching, around being seen by people, like putting myself out there. So I think I had the qualification for nearly 2 years before I taught my first class out of pure fear. So a lot of people who I train now, and they say that to me, I'm like, I completely get it. But I started with Pilates, and I remember doing Pilates classes and teaching Pilates classes and starting to feel this connection to my body that honestly, I used to think that everything was between like my collarbones and my head. Like I didn't know that I could connect that. I didn't know that my stomach would tell me how I felt. I didn't know that I'd be able to like feel a sensation somewhere other than what I thought in my brain. So that like body mind connection was something that fell forward, even though I was practicing physio and I was like asking people where their pain was and fascinated by the body and its reactions to things and how the body can improve its tolerance and build and strengthen. I just hadn't made that link. So it took getting really sick and really burnt out and feeling very lost and I suppose down to then come back and realize that really the answers were in my body. I obviously went on a bit of a journey after that. So doing really, honestly, really simple things. And then the simple things that I enjoyed, I wanted to share. And that's where kind of, so like my first business as such is the Mindful Physio. And that was just where I did classes and retreats. And that's where everything started. And then this year, it's expanded into ANAM, which means soul in Irish, and a home for your soul, because it's like all these little parts of me that were just parts have now come into one. And I never thought I'd get to work in a job, because I still work as a physio, but the clients that I attract are completely different. So when I'm in clinic, the clients I see might be like chronic stress, inflammation, autoimmune, chronic pain. I get very different clients, and I kind of get the clients that I wish I could have got when I worked in palliative care before they had a palliative diagnosis. So that was always the goal, to maybe reach people before it becomes something that's life limiting.
I feel like I've heard from many people that worked in healthcare almost getting to this like breaking point where it really affects them physically, and they cannot handle it anymore. And I can only imagine the weight of working in palliative care, like what that must be like. It took you to that breaking point and you were forced to spend that time by yourself. Like, we really do not spend enough time, actually listening to ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and being with ourselves. And sure, how are we meant to know what we want if we don't do that? It's all tied into that. So you started off with Pilates, and then how did you kind of, what was next? Was it yoga then, and then breath work, and how did it all work?
Yeah, so I said when I did my Pilates training, I would never train in yoga because that's so fluffy and so out there. I am so cynical. This is the thing. And like, I know you saw my TikTok about like healing and energy, and that is so far from where I started. But I think I always could feel what other people, like I had good enough intuition and empathy. I had a lot of empathy. That's why I loved the job. But you get a thing called compassionate fatigue if you work in healthcare, and you are taking on the burden of everyone for a very long time. And in the beginning, you're young and you're full of energy and you're going to change the world. So you come out and you do it. But like life catches up on you, and that heaviness. I did my thesis in college on burnout, and the irony of me getting severely burnt out like 5 or 6 months into my first job was, it's kind of hilarious now. But it's led to so much more. So I'll often say to people, like, if you look at the things that you've struggled with, or sometimes what we call the wounds, you often have a gift inside that wound. You just have to be brave enough to go into it. And that's honestly how yoga happened. So I knew I had all of these things that I was very uncomfortable with facing. So, like the perfectionism, the need to prove myself. I really wanted to be quote unquote successful as a physio. And I think if you were to ask me 6 years ago what that looked like, it would have been like a senior in a hospital, or like the lead physio of a team, or something that had a title attached to it. And then I went on my yoga teacher training. And honestly, I did it just for me. I don't think I ever was like, I really want to teach yoga. It was just this, it's 3 weeks. My body has been through hell and back. It took me a long time to feel like myself again after the kind of moment of breakdown, or breakthrough, sometimes we'll say. But it took a long time to feel like myself again. And by the time I got to my yoga teacher training, I was giving up. So I'd moved jobs. I spent 2 years in the hospice, and then I ended up working in pediatric disability. And I loved that job. I loved it. I still say to this day, I would go back. I loved the kids. I loved the staff. I loved the working environment. So it was probably my dream job. I was in a long-term relationship. I was very happy in my life. Like, I had set up at home. I was teaching Pilates here. I was running events here. But I was just like, there's something else, and I can't quite put my finger on it. And I honestly think, Una, it was probably the first time I started listening, really listening to
Mm.
myself and listening to my body. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, as you do, with my mum. And she was like, why are you about to blow up your life? Like, you have everything that someone at your age would want. Why do you feel this need to go and blow it all up? Because I had booked a one-way flight to do my yoga teacher training in Bali, and then I had no real intention on coming back. I said to everyone, like everyone else, a year, and I'm 3 years gone this March. So, but I remember sitting there and just getting this overwhelming feeling there's something coming. And the minute we landed in Bali and I went into that yoga teacher training, I remember being like, my life's never going to be the same. And it's not, it's not necessarily the yoga teacher training. It's what you put in is what you get out. So I just had this mindset of, I'm willing to face all the parts of me here that I don't like, that I've rejected, that I think aren't worthy, and I'm going to sit with them. And it was the hardest 3 weeks for people who want to book a YTT. And if you think it's going to be fun and namaste, it's not. It's for the most part an inward journey where you have a lot of meditation time, a lot of your body's sore. You don't want to speak to anyone anymore. You're in a group of people for 3 weeks. And I remember thinking, like, oh, this is who I am. Like, when I'm sore and when I'm stressed out and when I'm fatigued, this is who comes through, and that's okay. Like, I can accept her too. And someone had said to me previous to that Reiki would find me. And again, I had no experience of Reiki. I didn't know what that would mean or how that would look. And my first day of that YTT, the person who sat next to me, she was actually, like, she works in physics. She's really high up in a company in Dubai in physics, but she was just telling me that she was a Reiki master. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I don't really know what that means. And by the end of the training, she was like, I get this feeling I need to train you in Reiki. So she did my Reiki level 1 with me. And then my Reiki level 2, my friends sought out the Reiki master and bought my level 2 for a present. So I've never gone and actively sought it out, but it has always come. And then breathwork was the thing that I always say it's the glue that brought everything together. So I knew as a physio that people were experiencing things in their body that were coming up for a reason. Like, we'll often say there's a root cause to the thing that you're feeling. Like, you know, that chronic disease or that chronic stress has to have a way of releasing energy in some way in your body, but also just if there's emotional baggage, or like we call it trauma, but trauma is just a buzzword at the minute. It's so much deeper than that. It's like how your body responds to the stimulus, the environment, the experiences that it has. And I could honestly see that. I think that was the thing in palliative care. I was looking at these people who were at the end of their life telling you about their life, and I would be like, oh my God, the depth of the trauma, the depth of the experiences, unresolved emotions. You have these people on their deathbed wanting to apologize, needing forgiveness, like not letting things go their whole life until this moment where it's a little bit too late. And then you see that, and I can so see how the body reacts and expresses what we don't feel. So when I did breathwork for the first time, I had done it functionally. Like, I worked in respiratory physio for 2 years when I was in the hospice, and I loved it. And I understand the lungs, and I understand, like, we do a lot of breathing with patients, and it would have been functional, but this was utterly different. Breathwork in a somatic sense is about the body. So it's not just about connecting to the breath, and down regulation breath is brilliant, and it's really, really good for your functional lung capacity and everything. But this form of somatic breath work is about tapping into the soma, which is the body, and then on a deeper level, repressed or suppressed emotions. So the first time I did it, it was like being high as a kite. It was like going out of my body and observing myself from the third person, looking down and being like, that's why you are the way you are, not why you think you are the way you are. So I often give the example of one of the first breathworks I did. I was organizing a retreat at the time, and I was absolutely no fun outside of that. So I wouldn't do anything other than sit on the laptop and get this done, because I'm a perfectionist. This was the thought process I had. I'm a perfectionist, and if I'm going to do this, it's going to be done right. And I kept saying that to the girls. Everyone was like, you're an antichrist. Like, we're on our holidays. Why are you putting this pressure on yourself? And I remember going into that breath work, and I pulled a card that said balance at the beginning, and everyone in the room that was with me laughed, because I brought them all, and they were all like, you do need balance in your life. Like, this isn't the end of the world. And I was like, no, I'm a perfectionist. It needs to be perfect. And I went into the breath work, and I was brought right back to a moment where I was bullied as a kid. And I said something and everyone laughed. And I remember internalizing, I will never not be good enough again. I will show you how good it can be. And it was all coming from an internal place of, I need to prove to you that this is perfect. I actually don't care if it's perfect. I'm very laid back in my internal world, in my life. But when it comes to something that's outward facing, I'm like, this needs to be perfect so you think I'm perfect, or you can't laugh at me, or you can't look down at me. And I could have lived my life letting that wound drive me into all forms of burnout and perfectionism, or you could just sit and look and go back to the version of me that needed to be told that she was fine the way she was, and that what happened is not her story. It's something that just is an experience, but my body had to cry it out or let it move, let it shake, whatever it does. Breathwork honestly brings you on a journey you can't really describe. But it is amazing for that, for like getting to the root cause of why we have suppressed the emotion and then finding a way to move through it.
I'm really interested in breath work and learning more about it. How would you describe how that process happens? The idea where you are using your body or connection to your body to get to that point where you described leaving yourself, being able to look down and you were able to identify those repressed emotions. How does that actually work? Is it even possible to describe?
Yeah, well, I'm training breathwork now, so I have a much better understanding. And obviously, I've spent a lot of time talking about energetics and how we store emotion. But honestly, with breathwork, it's very much so an activating. So it's a nervous system activation. If you think about a lot of things that happen in our life activate us, but we don't work with our nervous system in a way that allows us to fully move through an emotion. So you might feel startled. An example I give to people is if you watched your parents fight as a kid. So you're 5 and you're watching 2 adults fighting with each other. You have no tools, you have no defenses, you have no voice, you have no physical strength. You're not going to do anything in that moment to impact the situation, but you are seeing it, you are observing it, and you are absorbing it. So a 5-year-old will look and still feel scared. They'll still feel anger. They'll still feel shame. They'll still feel rage, but they have nothing. They have no way of moving that emotion out of them. So often the way we might see that come up is in later life, if you're confronted and someone starts shouting in your face and you fawn, you cry, you completely melt away, you can't deal with it. It's not you in that moment that's reacting to the trigger. It's the 5-year-old version of you that never learned how to process that emotion. So like another example of that is, let's say you did cry as the 5-year-old, you did start screaming the house down and you took the attention away and you were sent to your room or you were shut out, you were shut away. You have internalized that when you express how you feel, it's not valid and we don't want to hear about it. So then as an adult, when you're asked how you feel and you shut down, you freeze, there's a reason behind it. So what happens in breathwork is we go back into the emotion. So it's like your body starts to get activated and you may feel physical sensations. So like your hands might cramp, you might feel it in your jaw, your body gets very energized. So like hot, cold, tingles, sensations. It's like you feeling your own energy. There is a reason for that as well. So if they're like anyone with a medical background listening, you become hypocapnic. So you blow off a lot of carbon dioxide and then your body has this response. But in the response, it brings up things from the past. And a beautiful way to look at breathwork, if you're listening to this and you're a little bit scared, you never get anything you're not ready for because your body is so protective. So your nervous system has spent its whole life. That's why you have the coping mechanism. Trauma is not what happened to you, it's how the thing that happened to you internalized in your system. So it's not that we're reliving the scenario. It's not that we're going to put you back into your 5-year-old body and make you watch it again. It's that you feel the feeling and you let it go. So it's this process of actually moving through the stuckness, like moving through the heaviness and not letting it trigger you for the rest of your life. Like there's a lot of dysfunctional families out there who blow the lid at each other and can't emotionally regulate, but we've never learned how. We never had a tool to actually do it. So like I do this with kids now, and obviously it's not as intense as a private session with an adult, but if I'm sitting with a group of kids and we're breathing and the body starts to get activated, I'm like, feel the magic in your hands, feel the sensations in your toes, and now we're going to laugh. We're going to laugh it all out because laughing is just as good of an energy releaser as crying is. It's an amazing way. The other really cool thing that happens when we breathe is we spend a huge amount of time in our prefrontal cortex, in our conscious brain, and a lot of the way we behave, a lot of our stories that we are living out come from our prefrontal cortex. So your ego mind, sometimes called your default mode network by Michael Pollan. And when you start to breathe in this pattern, you go through a thing called transient hypofrontality. So it's transient, it's just a moving moment. So we move through this where we come out of our prefrontal cortex and into our deeper brain areas. So sometimes your subconscious brain, your limbic brain. If you're not in your thinking brain, if you can't access thought, and people will say this all the time after breathwork or somatic healing, that they couldn't think. There was no thoughts. They were just in blank, like blackness, white space. They didn't know where they were. That's sometimes what I mean by this detachment from your physical body. That's actually just you detaching from your ego or transcending your ego. And if your ego is the thing that's keeping you small, so it's the thing that's stopping you from doing what you want to do, it's the thing that's holding you back from expressing yourself in a certain way, it's the thing that keeps you in the shitty relationships, that keeps you in the family dynamic that's not for you. If you were able to transcend your ego and actually listen to your body, so it will come up with a cue, you will sit in what feels like clarity, revelation, intuition. So people will be like, I got really clear intuition. I knew what I needed to do. I know what my next plan is. I know what my next move is, because you're not overthinking it. You're not letting your ego control it. So yeah, loads of different processes happen at once. And then if you have a facilitator who should be skilled in trauma informed care, because obviously when these things come up, it's very sensitive and we've got to manage it with that approach. You have a huge capacity to break the cycle, for the most part, is what I see people do. It's like breaking these cycles that have existed in their family line or in their environment for a really long time.
Wow. Do you believe that everybody should do this at some point?
I would love that. I would love that. I would love, there's kind of two things that in the next year, I suppose, would be my mission to create a more trauma informed society. I think if all of us had a better understanding of why people are the way they are and how we can approach that differently, the world would be a much kinder and more compassionate place. But yeah, if people learned these skills at an earlier age, and it's never too late. Like I'm running mum and daughter retreats. Well, I have been running them since I've been home. I have the next one on the 15th, and they're the most special things because I'm watching the woman who raised this young woman who has brought her to this space because she has done something for herself that has changed, like inherently changed something within her, and wanted to give it to her mum. And then to watch her mum go through a process of, I'm sad that I didn't have this sooner, but I'm happy that I found it when I did. I'm like, oh, if everyone could just even experience it for a moment. It's just reconnecting to yourself. And it's not about fixing you. It's not about like trying to find this thing outside of ourselves. You're not coming to me for healing. I'm holding you in your own capacity to heal. Like I'm not claiming to be, this or that or have the magic answer. I'm just saying if you connect to your body, it will give you all of the answers you need.
The answers are here within us, and yet we're just not tapping into them.
Exactly.
Do you find that there are a lot of skeptics out there? Do you think actually that's changing a little bit now, that people are actually a little bit more open to this?
Yeah, definitely. When I was home last June, I had a lot of people eye roll and scoff at me. And it was really only people who knew me, I suppose, that came and tried it when I was at home, or people who had maybe found the TikTok, because TikTok's a wild place. So if they see something and they're like, that's really interesting, you would have people travel from all over the country to come for a session. I do think what has happened, and obviously this is my side of it because I've been living in Sydney, but it is everywhere in Sydney now. Like I've ran sessions where we go round the room and you might just say your name and where you're from. And in a room of 30 women, every single woman will be Irish. And then I've had a few instances where the woman next to me, so the last woman in the group, is Australian. And she goes, did you just all come out here to heal? Or what's the story? And so many Irish people will say, well, I wouldn't have done it at home. I thought everyone would laugh at me. I thought like people would judge me for wanting to do this. So then I started holding men's groups. And like, honestly, when you read it's so funny reading feedback forms because men's brains work differently. But there was one that just said, I thought there were going to be a load of space cadets in the room. Like I thought everyone was going to be hippy dippy. And I came in and I saw a few county herders and I was like, what the hell? People are doing this. And I'm like, yeah, because everyone has something. Like if you tell me you don't have something, you haven't looked at yourself. Well, you can have the most perfect childhood and still have something that needs to be felt within you so that you can be, a lighter, happy, more open version of yourself. It's definitely changing. A lot of the facilitators that I've trained in Sydney have moved home, and they're doing amazing work at home. So they're running men's groups, they're running mum and daughter retreats, they're getting involved, they're in schools, they're in hospitals, because they were all coming from different backgrounds. But it took getting up and going to Australia to, I suppose, expand what you think you can do and who's judging you. Because if I'm all the way out there, I don't care. I don't care if Mary down the road has something to say about me, because she's not really in my sphere anymore. But the minute you come home, I did have a little moment of, oh my God. But I quickly realized that no one really cares. There's a beautiful thing about being Irish, where whether you're the most successful person in the world or you're at nothing, people just still see you for you. And it's both comforting and terrifying all at once.
It's very positive to see. I didn't realize there had been that dramatic a change in people's openness to healing and breath work. And I know yoga, obviously, that's kind of had a hold for the last while, but there's still a lot of people out there that you might say, oh, do you want to join me for a yoga class or something like that? They might be like, oh no, it's not for me. I kind of prefer something a little bit more of an intense workout. And I'm like, it's not a workout. Like, that's just not what it is. Like, and I often find that people are becoming so much more open to this. But at the same time, I also reflect on Ireland, and I suppose to bring it back to Ireland and Irish people, and that Irish people can often be viewed as quite practical. And I suppose you mentioned like that guy who gave you the review. He said, I thought it'd be full of space cadets, and then there was county hurlers. And so maybe he saw the county hurlers and he thought, oh God, yeah, this would be very practical now. Great. But then I think about old Irish ways and traditions, and that is very spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
or like paganism, or like, Irish mythology. Like there's definitely way more of a spirituality around it, like the fairies. And so do you think that with Irish people becoming more interested in healing and breath work and yoga, do you think that that's them connecting to their old ways in a sense?
Yeah, massively. I have been fascinated by this for a while now, because in a lot of my breathworks, if you do come out of your ego mind and you go deeper, so like my own experiences and then doing it on other people, you might sometimes have a past life experience where you like tap into something that's well before your time. Or people have come out and just said things where I'm like, that was so profound. Like, where did you get that from? In one of the breathworks recently, and this is going to sound so random, but I kept getting two-headed Anna, two-headed Anna. I was like, that's so random. I haven't thought about that since I was in primary school. And then I live in Meath, and I was up in Tara, and we were looking up the like history of the Destiny Stone. And I was like, oh my God, it's from the two-headed Anna. And then we were just talking, like I was with one of my friends who's from Navan and would be much more Tara informed than me, but learning about all of that again and understanding the shamanism that exists here and has always existed here. If you think about, Irish people might be very practical, but if there was a problem, you were sent to a healer. Like, had a stroke, straight to the healer, have eczema, straight to the healer. So these things that have been passed down through family lines and lineages, they haven't been lost. And we're one of the only cultures that has kept records, which is so fascinating and amazing. And yeah, like so spiritual. So I think it's in a lot of us. I also read recently that when the whole witch trials happened, because we're quite a skeptical people, but also superstitious, which I always find hilarious and fascinating, that for people who are so logical to then fear this concept or this idea so much. It's deeply ingrained in us. They were saying that when the witch trials happened, Ireland was so superstitious that they didn't. So druids, witches, whatever at the time that existed throughout Europe were being burned at the stake, but in Ireland we were too afraid to go near it. And if you ask your mother, your grandmother, like, is anyone very intuitive in the family? Does that run in the family? Most people will say, yeah, my grandmother was very connected, very intuitive. And religion, for the most part, has been incredibly controlling and oppressive in this country, but it's also been very connecting. So if you sat at mass for an hour on your Sunday, it's a form of meditation, it's a form of connecting. It's just other cultures do it differently. And like, even if you look at the connection between breath, so saying like a Hail Mary, the way you say the Hail Mary is the same length of breath as Om. It's the same. So it's all the same. It's to do with your nervous system and how collectively that starts to change, because we all co-regulate off each other. So when you feel better, when you feel connected, when you feel part of something, yeah, you're going to move differently, you're going to experience your life differently. And I think for a lot of people in this country, it came up on one of those TikTok posts, was where people said the church was controlling, and obviously has its massive flaws in history. It also was something that connected people and that made them feel like they belonged to something. So yeah, I think it's deeply ingrained. I think there's so much mythology. I think there's so much magic. I think Irish people are very spiritual, whether they know it or not. I love that about us. I love that we have this really deep history, because when we're on Australian land, I always honour the original custodian of the land. So I'd say the Gadigal people in Sydney, I'll honour the people who were there before colonisation. And since I've been home, I have been honouring our ancestors. My ancestors have lived on this land for as long as I can trace back. And how special is that, that you are from a long lineage that has grown and flourished on the land that you live on. So I think it's so special. It always gives me goosebumps when I say it to a group.
That would definitely give me goosebumps as well, I think, if I was present for that. You mentioned about religion there.
Mm.
Do you think that the fact that, I suppose, Catholicism in particular has become less of a thing, or less part of our culture and our society, that Irish people are almost looking around for something to fill that gap, and that is why they are turning towards other spiritual practices?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. People need to believe in something, but spirituality isn't a religion. It's just connecting to yourself. So I think it leaves people a lot more autonomous and feeling like I think the issue with organized religion is that we put all of this faith into a god or someone outside of ourselves. And any place where you start to connect to the God within yourself, or the wisdom within yourself, you're going to find it a lot easier to connect for the rest of your life. So yeah, I think spirituality has taken off. I see a massive growth for it. I think people are teaching their kids. I think mindfulness opened the door for spirituality to run,
Mm-hmm.
because the minute we become mindful of things, we start to notice so much more in our lives. And there are moments of magic in every day. If you look and you're not stuck in the stories or the rhetoric that you've always lived in, it's giving people choice as well, just giving them the choice in what you want to believe in, and take what you resonate with, leave what doesn't, and that's perfect.
Make it your own.
Mm-hmm.
I watched a video on TikTok that you put up recently, and you were talking about facilitating a session in Ireland or with Irish people versus facilitating one in Australia and with non-Irish people.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that you noticed there's this deep sadness amongst the Irish people when you were facilitating this.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? And do you have any thoughts on why that might be?
I was definitely taken back, because I still work with a lot of Irish people in Australia. So I suppose I thought I have been connected to that for nearly 3 years now. The only way I can describe it is when you're sensing energy, you're obviously tapping into something that you have felt yourself. So it's all co regulation. But the minute you walk into someone's energetic field, you can just feel it, and it's very hard to describe unless you're like working in it. But I'm sure some of you have just walked into a room and you can feel that it's tense, or you can feel that there's someone's not saying something. It kind of feels like that with like Reiki and breathwork, but on steroids. So every person I put my hand on over that weekend, so I think we breathed about 30 people all together if you're including the facilitators, there was just this deep sense of sadness or heaviness, and it was sitting on people's hearts. And I really sat with it afterwards on what's coming up. I think we are in a period of time where they say like people are waking up. So this whole idea that the world is waking up and that it's changing, something is starting to shift. You see the fall of organized religions, maybe the questioning of governments, of structures, of everything that we've once believed in and put all of our power into. So power is being taken away from you and placed in something that is above you. I think that's changing, and people are starting to come back to themselves and ask themselves, like, what do I want? What do I actually feel? But in order to break that chain or break the cycle, you've got to be the person to feel it. So, like we'll often say, trauma runs in the family until it runs into you. There are definitely a massive group of people. I don't think it's a group anymore. I think it's a movement of people who aren't afraid. I think Ireland has been heavy in silence and avoidance for a very long time. And as things come out, it's going to bring up a lot in the people who may not even know wherein their ancestry has been affected. Like, I was even listening to something on the Magdalene Laundries recently and thinking to myself, I don't know if anyone in my family, I would never know. That's not something that's documented. And if it was, it would have been so shameful. It would have never been spoken about in our family. So as I listen to something like that and I feel all these feelings, you're sometimes like, why do I feel so connected to that? Look at Irish people and the response to what's happening in Palestine. I think this, obviously, we have a memory of oppression, and especially in the North, understanding that conflict on a whole other level is something that they can really relate to. But they say that trauma, intergenerational trauma, so trauma that's passed down from one generation to the other, can go like 4 to 7 generations back, but sometimes you can still be experiencing the trauma that's moved through 200 generations. So it's crazy when you actually look at it and how we're passing things down. And like epigenetics is, it's been studied and it's been looked at, but it's not fully concrete that genes are switched on and off, so that you're given a set of genes and they're switched on and off depending on your environment. But intergenerational trauma has been studied and has been shown that if this happened to your ancestors, it's sometimes the messaging that gets passed down. So we stay quiet, we don't give out, we don't push the boundary. Think about the amount of families that didn't say anything to the church because of fear and because of shame. That shame is then carried, and the way we look at it in somatics is shame lives in the shadows. So the minute you shine light, the minute you give your awareness to the things that are shameful, they dissipate. They don't hold the same power over you. And I think the same thing happens if you look at your response, like what you feel really passionately about. So if you're connected, and I'm just using Palestine because it's horrendous and it's something that is coming up, and look at the rest of the world and then look at the response of certain groups, yeah, it's probably deeply woven into your genetics. Like someone in your family line experienced exactly what that group of people are now experiencing. And whether or not you can cognize it, whether or not you understand why you feel that way, you don't have to think it, you just have to feel it. So it brings up anger, it brings up rage, it brings up memories of oppression. And yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think I put my hand and I could feel the heaviness or the sadness that is remembering all of the people who've come before you. And I feel really privileged that I'm at a point in my life where I have ancestors that fought so hard for me to have the rights that I have and for me to live the life that I live, like a free life and one of opportunity. It just simply didn't exist for some people in our family line. Like if you even think about the things that the first time you heard them, that you had a really big pull towards. So I think I read Michael Collins that came. Do you remember the Independent used to send out the history books every Sunday? I read one on the Easter Rising, Michael Collins, when I was 12. And in history in school, I knew every date, I knew everything because I was absolutely enthralled by it. I was so fascinated by Irish history. And now if I talk about it, I get really passionate about it. But there is something in me that remembers, that connects, because there's definitely somebody somewhere that played a role or that has carried the memory of that into me. And you someday will be a future ancestor. And I think that's what's really important for anyone who's like standing on the edge of maybe like it's too, I don't want to go into that. That's something I get all the time. I don't want to know. I don't want to know the parts of me that are dark and hidden. I don't want to do the work. And I'm like, that's fine. But your purpose here is to leave a better world than the one you entered. And if you truly want to affect the life of somebody who comes after you, which is the reason I kind of do everything now out of this purpose of legacy, like what am I going to leave behind? I want to leave as much of a clean slate. I'm not saying that I'm in any way perfect, but as much of a clean slate as I can. So if I work on everything that I need to feel, if I work on maybe the the patterns or the stories or the beliefs that have come up in my family line, and it stops with me. The silence stops with me, the avoidance stops with me, the shame stops with me. It's not going to be passed on to my little girl or my little boy and their little girl and their little boy. And then something changes.
It's very hopeful for future Irish people if we are, as you said, you talk about waking up to these kind of negative powers. I had a previous episode with Alva Smith, and we talked about like late stage capitalism and such, the falling of these powers and people's waking up to their spirituality. It's all connected in together.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about the idea of think about yourself as a future ancestor and take that responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And if not to help you now, but to help someone that comes after you, it's both a selfless act and a selfish act in a way, because you're not only helping yourself, but you're helping others as well. Ireland as well, we oftentimes do talk about the intergenerational trauma, particularly in terms of the famine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that tends to be one of the biggest topics. I find it absolutely mad that the famine, the way it's taught in schools, they don't really teach the extent of it.
Not at
And
all.
I'm like, why are we not teaching that? Like you mentioned about the history books there and Michael Collins. I would be very similar if I find out something new about something to do with Irish history or Irish culture. I'm just like obsessed about it. I'll be spouting out facts to people whether they want to hear them or not, but it really like riles me up.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you watch different, obviously these films are dramatized a bit, but if you do watch films based around Irish history, God, you just get so emotional watching it. And it's like hard to believe that this was like, it really was not that long ago.
Recent history, yeah.
So recent. You were talking about healing with Irish people. Do you feel that Irish people are more emotional or more empathetic as a result of this trauma?
Oh, it's a good question. I feel like there's two sides to this, because if we talk about silence and avoidance, there is often a numbing that happens. And I think there's not one family in this country, if you went through your entire extended family and the generation above us and maybe above them, that doesn't have a history or an issue with alcoholism. I think the rates of depression in this country are ridiculously high, and that we may be living out or experiencing what everyone before us just suppressed. So where we might be empathetic to some people's like, look, we're one of the most charitable countries in the world. And I think massive hearts. I think the sadness that I felt on people and on their heart was the same capacity that they have to love and to give and to care. But it's a double-edged blade sword. It's like where we avoid the feelings and we might give that outwardly. So you can be incredibly charitable and caring and do everything for everyone else. There can be an avoidance of what we need to face for ourselves. So I have alcoholism on both sides of my family, like from my grandparents, from their like siblings. But my two sets of grandparents didn't really touch drink then. So they were terrified of the thing that destroyed the generation ahead of them. And I can see how in my life I could have an addictive personality for some things, but it's numbing something. I know that. I know that when I lean all in, and for me for a while it was exercise. It was something as simple as, because I have been warned my whole life, it runs in the family, the drink runs in the family, like don't do it. But then it can be other coping mechanisms, and you're numbing out the thing that you're not feeling. So I think it's really interesting to look at our culture and look at how good we are and how kind we are, and yeah, that there's a huge capacity to love there. But what I have seen, what met me with that sadness, was also this willingness and this capacity to heal and to come back to wholeness. So rather than band-aiding over something, it's like sitting in it and being like, why do we feel shame when we talk about a certain topic, which is a lot of them in our culture. I often feel really for my mom and her age group, that if you grew up in the 80s, like this was not the environment or the place that it is today. I know I grew up with like a massive fear of getting pregnant, but that was a projected fear that was put onto me because of what they had experienced. So we're all passing down messages or stories and beliefs. And yes, one of those that I have definitely grown up with is be generous, give to those who don't have. But then on the flip side of that, I can sometimes see that people get disconnected because this is a country that had nothing for a really long period of time. It didn't even own our own land. And if you have nothing for a really long period of time and then you come into something, it can be, are we always just chasing, never having enough? Is it always going to be this burden? I had a session once where all I could see was like my ancestors carrying like stones on their back, basically being like, we have nothing, like we're constantly going to be carrying a burden, and then you never feel safe. So what, you have all your money underneath your floorboard in your room because the world could, but that's a story. That's a story. This fear of losing it all. Because if you come from a generation, or from generations that never had anything, yeah, that fear is going to be real. It's a real thing for you. I love how charitable, I love how open, how fun as a country, but is the like small talk, the kind of, oh sure, everything's grand, is that a cover for, I can't actually go any deeper than the small talk, because that would be too painful.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that you mentioned there that has sparked off many thoughts in my
Mm,
mind. You mentioned about Irish people being charitable,
mm,
and something that came to my mind is the idea of our low corporate tax rate. Because you were saying maybe we need to be a little bit more self-aware about some of these positive traits, or maybe traits that are viewed positively, and how they can actually reflect badly on us. So I mean, the corporate tax rate is one that came into my mind, and I was thinking, yeah, it has attracted business, and it has brought a lot of wealth to this country.
mhm.
But as you said, if you have all this wealth, you have the money under the floorboards, but you're carrying this burden of all this undealt with emotion and trauma. um then what is the point? Really, in a way, it's like it's a good metaphor for Ireland and Irish people, and what we have come through. You mentioned your mother's generation, and being like a woman in the 80s, my god, her fear of growing up, I cannot get pregnant, I'll be sent to a Magdalene laundry, kind of a thing. And that has passed on to us. I was kind of thinking when you said that, I was like, has it been passed on? And I was like, well, yeah, actually, I actually forget that fear. You'll kind of drive it out of your mind as soon as possible. I'm 28, and I can't believe that was a fear of mine. And when you think of how far we actually have come in the last 5-10 years, it's incredible, really. But in a way, we're moving so fast without doing that emotional work, and that could be more damaging in the long run. But as you said, we are waking up to that, so that is at least a positive.
You can do the cognitive work. So often that's what happens, and that's the difference between normal therapy and somatic therapy, is that you'll do the cognitive work. So you can understand that, having rights for women to choose, that's a cognitive thing that's in law. But does the woman experience shame when they go through with the thing? Yeah, because it's still deeply ingrained in the society. So it's got to change on a somatic level, on a felt sense level, rather than just a cognitive level.
Yes, definitely. You mentioned about alcoholism as well. Irish people probably dealt with that in a long time, not only in a quiet way, but like, let's laugh about it. Like, let's laugh about your man that can put away 10 pints, no bother. Or like, even they have that meme about like pint baby, or like pint man, or it's like, can we just pause for a second and think about how damaging that is as like an internalized belief? But I have noticed a huge difference in young Irish people and their relationship to alcohol. I think it
Definitely.
has changed so much. And I think as well, like you talked about, like, you looked for exercise as your kind of like escape. And people might go, oh, that's so healthy. But it's still a control thing. It's just about having a look and think, what habits do I have, and what are in excess? Am I putting too much pressure on myself for striving for that perfectionism, like you mentioned at the start? It's all about listening inward, connecting with yourself, and having those reflections.
You'll see it now in people all the time. Like, you'll start to notice it when you have an awareness of the parts of you that you have healed or you're healing. And it's a journey. We're not trying to fix anything. So then it's just, I'll always say, it's just an exploration of who you are on a deeper level. But like that with the alcoholism, and noticing the change in Irish people now, in Australia, and I really dislike that reputation that we have of being drunkards and being whatever, because you know what, like underneath all of that, there's a population of highly creative, intelligent, and like really special people who then get branded across the world as just being like the Paddy's being drunk in the corner. And it's so frustrating. But we run ice baths and breathwork at 6 o'clock in the morning in Sydney. So we used to do Thursdays and Saturdays. And the lifeguards are obviously all Australian. And they came down and they were like, many as a year we've been picking up Irish people off those steps, like picking them up off the steps at 6 o'clock in the morning after being out all night. And he's like, to see all of you down here, 6 o'clock in the morning, breathing and getting into ice baths, they were laughing, being like, what's happened? And I was like, something is happening. It's happened. And I really hope it doesn't go. I don't think it's going to go backwards. I think it's very hopeful. And the more awareness that we have, the more we talk about it, the easier that gets for everyone.
I agree with you, and it is very hopeful. It's very exciting as well. You were talking about a generational healing retreat about the mother and the daughter. Where did the idea for that come about? I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, so I was on a retreat when that always happens to me. Because you're so present in what you're doing, you get all of this creativity or inspiration. So I was sitting and we were doing a share circle on a Bali retreat. Everyone on the retreat, bar one, was Irish. And we were doing a share circle, everyone was going around, and a lot of stuff was coming up around mothers. They often say that a lot of our insecurities come from our mothers. So if you think about how your mother looked at herself, how she spoke about herself, I know from working with women all the time as well that a lot of it comes down to, like, even think of the Weight Watchers, like that whole era of the pressure that they were under, like the comments. If you think about, I did a post before on like the Special K diet and the pictures they used to put in magazines of women postpartum being like, oh, she hasn't got her body back from her baby body and this sort of stuff. Our mom's generation were absolutely inundated with that. And it's just led to a deep insecurity in a lot of women our age, because that's what we grew up listening to and absorbing. So the girls were just talking about their mums and how they feel like they wish they could go back and have a conversation, but maybe their mums would get defensive and it would be very hard. But now they're doing it for themselves. And I was sitting there thinking, how nice would it be to be able to hold a conversation that's not, it's not pointing fingers, it's not blaming anyone, but it's recognizing that they didn't have what they needed in that moment either. And a lot of Irish mums would say that their mums were very disconnected, very harsh with them. That's a big thing that has come through. Some are really lucky and they have a very loving mum, but there was this harshness of like put up and shut up. Like if you talk to our mum's generation and the generation before about birth and how taboo it was to talk about anything in and around that. Like, I don't know anything about my mum's experience with that or my granny's experience with that, but birth trauma is a real thing and it stays with the woman and with the child. So if you were to sit and hold a space for both, I just in my head was like, that in my head sounds very healing and very special. And honestly, I came home last June to do that for the first time. And it was one of the most special experiences. Like at the beginning, the poor mothers didn't even know why they were there. Like a lot of them had just been brought along by their daughters. But by the end of it, they were like, I just never had this opportunity. I was never given the space. I was never asked how I felt. No one cared how I felt. It was about being a mother. And if you think about anything that takes all of your identity, like this feeling of I am a mother and that's all I am, well, you're so much more than that. You were someone before you were a mother and you will be someone after. Parenting is transient. It's only a period of your life. So we've got to expand ourselves and ask ourselves, like, what do we want? Who do we want to be? And then what's your legacy? What do you want to leave the world? Yes, your children are one thing. And they say that it's the greatest reflection of your spiritual growth is to look at your children and say, okay, I did heal that in myself because it's not showing up in my children.
It sounds like it was an incredible healing experience for both those mothers and those daughters. I find it funny, the idea of all these Irish mammies turning up saying, what's this there now? Like,
just here for a relaxing weekend, and like that's not really what I do. So I'm like, oh,
probably going, oh, this is a bit of a spa weekend now. My daughter, they told their friends, oh, I'm being brought on a spa weekend by my daughter. They got a bit of a shock, but I'm sure they got far more out of it than a massage and a bit of a steam room would do. We have another one coming up as well.
Yes, so I have another one on the 14th. I'm really lucky that all of the retreats at home just sold so well this year. That's what I mean. I feel like something's shifted. Like people are ready. They're very open and very willing. I know there are some men in the space doing fantastic work with men, and I feel like men need another man to show them, because like if I tell you what to do, and it can come from a nurturing, mothering space from a woman, but they often need the representation. There's an exercise that I've done with my whole family that looks at like different things that have happened to you and got everyone to write down. And it's mad how people can relate to the same experience in such different ways. So, like an experience that happened to me might be perceived completely differently by my little sister. An example I give of that is like when the crash happened, I was old enough to recognize what was happening. And I remember thinking, and when we did this exercise and we all sat down, I said, I thought we were going to lose everything. I thought we were going to be kicked out of our house. So I would be counting the pennies. Like, and I think I was 9 or 10. You know, you're very susceptible to what's going on. But my younger sister said that they just knew mom and dad were very on edge. They didn't know why mom and dad weren't giving them the attention that they were getting. Like, it's fascinating to see how the same thing can affect people in such different ways. So to sit with your family and have open conversations about stuff like that is so healing, because the pressure that your parents felt to provide, you might not ever have felt like you just needed to be told that you were safe as a kid. You actually don't need to be given the presents or given whatever. Most people just need safety, love, and time, effort. It comes down to such simple things. While I would notice a pattern sometimes when I do work with like mums and daughters or men in particular, of needing to provide and needing to give everything. So work really, really hard to provide for the next generation. While I'm like, actually, your time and your love and your effort is worth way more, because the money's just money when you're dead and buried, but memories will stay with your family forever. So
Do you have an online workshop available this month?
yes, next Monday. So that's just an online breathwork. They're very much so like tasters for anyone who is looking to try breathwork. And then I have two events in December. One on the 14th is like small group retreat day. And that's for anyone really who's looking to go a little deeper. It'll be like yoga, some embodiment practices, which are somatic practices, and then some breath work. And then a bigger event. So it's very much so targeted towards anyone who doesn't vibe with the idea of like a drinking Christmas party. So it's a wellness Christmas party, which is going to be like some mindful movement. We have some fantastic speakers across different industries. So I wanted to make sure that even if you don't get a Christmas party, that one came through me sitting there being like, oh, being self-employed is all fun and games until you don't have anyone to celebrate your year with. So if that's somebody who's like, oh, I'd love to go and just have a day to give back to myself. If you've been in a role, I was even thinking about like me working in healthcare all those years ago, I would have loved to be able to go something that was just like, okay, people are going through what I'm going through, and it's okay to sit there and be really proud of yourself for what you've achieved and everything that you've done. So yeah, that's on the 15th of December.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to include all of these in the show notes if people want to go and find out more and book in and stuff like that. But I'll close the interview with the last question that I ask everyone, Kiva. What does it mean to be Irish?
Oh, and I love that question. I think for me, anyway, being Irish means that you are kind at heart. I think that comes through a lot of people. I think it means that you thrive off community. And one of the things you're most proud of is actually being Irish. But I think that's the thing, that you'll never be too far away from home, because there's always another Irish person out there who will see you and look out for you and care for you and all of that. So yeah, for me anyway, it's living from your heart and accepting everyone with open arms, because I think that's something I've learned from growing up in Ireland and being Irish, and that comes with accepting all the good and everything in between. It's definitely something I'm very proud of, and it's so lovely to go anywhere in the world and feel like you always have a home.
That's a beautiful answer. I love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and giving the time, and this has just been a really insightful interview. I'm aware of a lot of the stuff that you do. Like, I practice yoga very often, but I do struggle to connect more so with myself. My mind would be constantly racing. And I know that's when you are meditating, it is allowed to race. It's about bringing yourself back. You know, I do understand that, but I suppose I'm still very much on that journey. But I'm excited to explore that a little bit more. So this has been really, really insightful. So thank you so much, Kiva. Gurv mila mila mahagat.
Oh, very good. And thank you for having me. It was just lovely to have the conversation, and you're a fantastic podcaster as well. It's so good when you feel like you're really going deeper on a topic. So thank you for that. Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode, of course, as always, please do share it with a friend, give the show a follow and a rating, and engage with it. Maybe throw it up in the old Instagram story there if you're feeling generous. Thank you so much, Gurvmila.